Hello and welcome to another edition of Profiles and Issues, the Westchester Cable Television News talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Our topic for this broadcast, the June 25th Democratic primary for the New York State Assembly seat in the 92nd District. This area currently includes most of the town of Greenburgh, the town of Mount Pleasant, and part of Northwest Yonkers. My guest for this program is former Assemblyperson Tom Abinanti, who held the seat for 12 distinguished years of public service before losing the primary to the present incumbent, Mary Jane Shimsky, 2 years ago. Abinanti said he was encouraged to run again by people in Greenburgh, including Supervisor Paul Feiner, because Shimsky failed to fight against state legislation that would make it easier for Edgemont to incorporate into a village, thus causing property taxes to skyrocket and business activity and quality of life to decline for Greenburgh and non-incorporated residents. Assemblyperson Shimsky refutes the charges. This primary is shaping up to be a battle royale, and we have managed to book both candidates for interviews. And now my interview with former Assemblyperson Tom Abinanti. Tom Abinanti, welcome back to Profiles and Issues.
Thank you, Dennis. Nice to be here.
Okay, now at this particular time, we find you in a Democratic primary race. So the answer is, why did you the question is, why did you decide to run in a Democratic primary on June 25th for your previous assembly seat in the 92nd District?
Well, there were several reasons. The main reason is I was asked by the supervisor of the town of Greenburgh, Paul Feiner, and by community members to step up. They were very concerned that the incumbent, Mary Jane Shimsky, sponsored legislation which allows Edgemont to continue its efforts to form a separate village and take millions of dollars out of the Greenburgh budget and leave the entire burden of the infrastructure, the employees, the resources of the town in the hands of basically the middle class and the poor part of town. And so they would have to see a huge increase in taxes and a major cut in services if Edgemont were to leave and form its own village and take its taxes and go its own way. So that was the first thing. People asked me to run again. They needed a viable candidate. And I was available because, secondly, the people in the disability community asked me to run again. As you know, I was chair of the Committee on People with Disabilities. I convinced the Speaker to set that committee up. I gave up a high-ranking committee to take that committee, a brand new committee, and we were just getting started in making people with disabilities a voice in the New York State Assembly. And since I've left, no major legislation on behalf of people with disabilities has passed. And I've been a statewide spokesperson for people with disabilities, but it's much more difficult to do it from the outside. When you're on the inside, the people at OPWDD listen to you. That's the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. And you have a certain amount of clout to try to change bad policies. Thirdly, I think I'm a much more effective legislator, just in style and substance. Over the years, I've produced a lot of legislation, passed a lot of legislation, but more importantly, I'm in touch with all of the communities in Greenburgh and Mount Pleasant, and I have a good relationship with the mayor of Yonkers. And this district includes the northwest section of Yonkers. And over the years, if you take a look at the record of the incumbent, Mary Jane Shimsky, she just doesn't have a record of producing anything. She was in the county legislature for 12 years, and all we could find is one bill that she passed. And I'm still waiting to hear back from her to tell me what else she passed when she was in the legislature. She's going to tell you it's all about cooperation, it's all about working with people, and you work together as a group. Okay, well, she's not working together with Greenburgh right now. She passed legislation such that the town board is hiring lawyers to sue the state because of what she
let's
did.
be more specific, okay? You asserted, I believe, that she waived the mandated review approved by a state commission. In other words, waives requirements that the new village
Right.
must not have a detrimental impact on the fiscal condition, the services and taxation of residents.
Yeah, so for
and
several
rest of the
years, I
town.
was trying to pass legislation which would change the way villages are set up. The old-fashioned way was a group of people would get together, as long as they had 500 signatures. They would submit a petition to the supervisor of the town, and the town supervisor would look to see if it was a sufficient petition. Edgemont tried twice. Both times they got the boundary lines wrong. One time they tried to use the fire district, I think, and the other time they tried to use the school district, but those lines are so old they're not even accurate. And so both times they were thrown out. Greenberg pushed back. The town board supported the supervisor, and they were very, very strong in their effort to push back on Edgemont. And I was trying, working with them, to pass legislation in Albany. I had a relationship with senators and assembly members, and we were trying to get some legislation that we could get through. And I later found out that it was the senator, Andrea Cousins, who was not supportive. And so here we are trying to push legislation while the head of the Senate was not supportive. Then, after I left, the last 4 days before the end of the 23 session, that's Mary Jane Shimsky's first session, Cousins puts out a piece of legislation, and so does Senator Skoufis, two of the people who have communities that were trying to form villages. And Mary Jane Shimsky signed that as a sponsor of both. And the legislation went through, and that legislation requires state approval before anyone could have a vote on whether or not to form their own separate village. Problem is, the legislation that Shimsky's got her name on exempts Edgemont. So everywhere in the state...
Till 2040, right?
No.
Or was that something that the governor...
No, hold on. Nope, let's not get confused here. The original piece of legislation, which was voted on June 10th, 2023, bill number A7761, that's the bill that Shimsky sponsored, and that bill exempted Edgemont forever. Then there was the Skoufis bill, which also exempted Edgemont forever, but that doesn't really affect Edgemont. It deals with some other tangential things. But the governor looked at the bills and said, I want to change the minimum number of people that you need to form a village. The legislature was trying to make it 2,000, and she said, that's too many, make it 1,500. Doesn't affect Edgemont, right? Lo and behold, the first bill in the Senate this year was a chapter amendment, an amendment to the original bill that Shimsky passed, and it was supposed to just change the number of people that you needed. And lo and behold, it had some additional language. And my understanding is the additional language was that Edgemont had to complete its process by 2040, 16 years. But that's actually a limitation on the Shimsky bill, not an expansion. Shimsky is going around saying, I never passed legislation that would allow Edgemont to continue moving in the direction it was going. Well, your bill, A7761, that you passed on June 10th, 2023, does that. She's trying to hide behind the chapter amendment and say, I voted against the chapter amendment.
Right.
Well, you know what? You voted against the chapter amendment, but that was only for show. Okay? But that's after you knew I was running against you. That's after you knew that the town was very upset and was going to sue. Okay? That's when you voted against the chapter amendment. But frankly, it's very interesting because if you read that bill carefully, that bill may be more favorable to the town than the Shimsky bill was in the first place. But I'm not going to get into that. The fact is, she should have known early on, you don't exempt Edgemont. The way you get things done in Albany is exactly what she said, that you have to have cooperation, you have to work with people, you have to have coalitions. Well, you just blew your coalition. All of the people who want to make changes in the village law are now satisfied. The only place in the state that is not satisfied is Greenberg.
Right.
How are you now going to change the law back? And she said she's not going to try to change it back because the people who supported me, people who got this committee called Save Greenberg, went to her and said, will you move to close the loophole? And she said no. So I'm running. And I'm going to work to change that loophole. I know how to put coalitions together. I got a lot of legislation passed at the County Board of Legislators and in the State Assembly. And my pledge to the people of Greenburgh is my first bill will be to close that loophole and close the carve-out and make Edgemont follow the same rules as everybody else in the state.
I just want to clarify a couple of points. According to what that committee put out, and I guess Feiner and you feel the same way, if Edgemont does incorporate, the property taxes would skyrocket, right?
Well, you've got
up to 7%.
Usually, what you do is when I was on the town board and I was on the county board. I've dealt with budgets at the local level. You take a look at what your needs are, what your revenues are, and you try to match them up. And if you need to add some more to the needs, to pay for things, you raise taxes a little bit. You can't do it a lot. So now you've got Greenburgh with a full infrastructure, certain number of parks and roads and police department and public works department, equipped to handle the entire unincorporated area of the town of Greenburgh. The number of cops, the number of equipment pieces that you have, the town parks. Right. Now, if you're going to remove some $18 million from a $90 million budget, there's some estimates, maybe it's $15 million or whatever, you're talking a big chunk of money that's got to come out. And a report was just done, which didn't do a very good job, but what it said was that if the town of Greenburgh cut 7% of its expenditures, it would only have a tax increase of 7%. You're talking a 14% change here, right? So do you think the people in the middle class section of Greenburgh will be able to afford a 14% tax increase, or want to see a 7% cut in their services and a 7% increase? And then what about when you move to the poorer section of town? Okay? Who's going to pay for that? Right now, look, I work on the belief that you pay what you can afford and you get what you need. Okay? That's the philosophy that I work on. And so there are a lot of poor people in the town of Greenburgh that the town is very well taken care of. They have after-school programs to give kids a start when and they've got a good police department, they've got good public works, they got some beautiful parks. What are they going to do, sell off the parks? I mean, when you say 7%, how do you take 7% of the parks? You can't sell those parks off. And so what are you going to do? Because you're taking the wealthiest part of town that uses the least services and removing them from the operation of the town of Greenburgh. Now, the people in the villages are saying, well, how does this affect us? Why should we care? We've got our own little governments in Hastings and Dobbs Ferry and Elmsford, et cetera. Well, one of the things is you need a strong government right next to you as a backup. Each police department in the villages at night has 1 or 2 cops on. And if there's a real emergency in that village, you got to call for mutual aid. And who's going to give you the fastest mutual aid? It's the town of Greenburgh with a large police department. You cut that mutual aid's not going to be there. And for EMS, okay, they all have volunteer ambulance corps, which unfortunately are struggling these days. And the villages can't afford to go hire a private company to back them up, Empress Ambulance or whatever that is. Greenburgh comes in with their paraprofessionals, the medics. Yeah, the medics come in as the backup. The volunteers show up, they do what they can, and then Greenburgh's people come in, and they're part of the police department. I was on the town board when we started that approach, and it works very, very well. So the people in the villages will suffer as well. And then if certain things start to fold, then they're going to look at and say, well, how can we save unincorporated Greenburgh by going to the villages and asking for their cooperation, for them to join our park system, and now all of a sudden you've got a whole change in the system, which is going to cost everybody, and it's going to damage the region, because Greenburgh is an important part of the entire region of response teams.
Okay, so let's fast forward to this year now. We're almost in May. Is there anything, I mean, the fact that the governor signed the bill, is there anything now at this stage that could be done at least this year?
Well, yes, the current legislature could change the legislation. This was not something.
How would they do it? How would
they put another bill in? You put in a bill and you repeal that section of the bill that dealt with Edgemont. There's a specific exemption in the bill, and it happens all of the time that people discover, oh my God.
But wouldn't you have to wait, if according to you, if Shimsky doesn't want to do it, then don't you have to wait till November till you have if you have a new assembly
Well,
person?
that's
who would
the
have
argument to
do it?
elect me, because starting January 1, the first thing I would do is put in legislation to remedy this problem. And look, you've got to be creative. You've got to find different ways of doing it. Okay, I mean, I've had to do that on several pieces of legislation.
I mean, do you have colleagues that you've made friends with over the years that you could give it to before November and maybe
there would be
start?
nobody. There would be nobody in the legislature now who cares, because it's not their
area.
it's not their district. Okay. On the other hand, when I get there, they're going to look at me and say, "This guy cares. He really wants this for his district. We're going to help him and do what we can." Then the question is, how do we get the Senate to come around? And if I am elected over Shimsky, then the follower of Cousins will no longer be there, and Cousins will get the message that she's got a very angry constituency. And, you know, as I said, we want to take from the people who can afford it and give to the people who really need it to get a start. And Senator Cousins talks about it all the time, about how we help the poor people. And we're talking here about a lot of kids who come out of public housing, who come out of subsidized housing, who rely on the services. And we wouldn't be taking those services away from them, and that's just not fair. That's not right.
All right. If Edgemont does not wait and they try to incorporate this year, is it going to end up in the courts?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Like it has in
I believe that
previous
this
years?
legislation is defective. It's not a secret. And the legislators' leaders knew there was an issue here, and they got an opinion that says that this bill is okay. My opinion is this violates the Constitution. It's not a constitutional bill. You can't pass a bill with respect to one community only without that community consenting. So it's a home rule. Okay, so I think Greenberg's got a good chance to at least slow this up. I'm sure it'll be back in court. It'll be all the way up to the Court of Appeals again, and by then I'll be in the legislature working on a remedy on behalf of Greenberg. You know, there's a bigger issue here, though, and that's a question of trust. You know, people can trust. Look at my record and what I've done for our community, and I've been trustworthy. I think this shows that unfortunately Mary Jane Shimsky betrayed Greenberg. I'm not quite sure why, except that maybe she was, you know, following the political will of the Democratic Committee in Greenberg and the state, the county Democratic Party. You know, let's face it, Edgemont is an influential part of the community. It's a wealthy community. They give a lot of campaign contributions. They have a lot of high-powered lobbyists, and you know, it looks to me from the outside that Shimsky was just following the party leadership. This is what they wanted done, and that's what she did, and she betrayed her constituents. She doesn't even represent Edgemont. It's not even in her district. Why would she do this?
Yeah, okay, I think we have to move on. Okay, but thank you for that full explanation. Okay, now, you know, you've been on the scene, well, for what, 20...
I've been on the scene for as I think Mary Jane last time in the campaign added them up and said 37 years.
Yes.
I did spend 6 years as a Greenberg Town Councilman,
Right.
19 years as a county legislator, and then 12 years as an assembly member. It's interesting because she was saying I was there too long, but she had worked for Richard Brodsky for a short period of time. Richard was there for 27 years.
All right, I want to focus because
I was a county legislator waiting for Richard to move on.
Okay. I don't know really if there's anything that can be done on the state level, and this is not a new problem to Westchester or the country, but it has surfaced again because of the war between Israel and Hamas. And now it surfaced more anti-Semitism. We've had the problems with the anti-Asian, African Americans, other communities, but now we see that. And, you know, and I'm not going to name the school, but there are state-funded schools where, you know, look, when I was a kid, I demonstrated, but I had respect for the law, you know, and I'm not saying I'm a perfect, but I knew what the bounds were for demonstration. And some of the things that we see in the demonstrations transcend that. Is there any way, is there anything that legislators can do? I know that,
I
go ahead.
think that legislators are supposed to be leaders. We're public officials. I tweeted recently that said, "Protest is American, hate speech is un-American." And I think that's important. I protested the Vietnam War as well. Okay, I was there. I was counseling people, and I was one of the people who led the group called the Law Students Against the War when I was in law school at NYU. We were one of the leading protesters of the war. It came after Kent State shooting. But like you said, we respected people on the other side. There were always a few crazies who were out there, trying to stimulate the chaos. But by and large, it was a peaceful protest, and it respected the rights of those with whom we disagreed. And I am very troubled by what we're seeing now. And I think public officials have to stand up. And frankly, I don't think that Mary Jane Shimsky has spoken out at all. She did say somewhere along the way that she signed a letter. Well, I signed the same letter, even I wasn't a public official. I was a former public official. And it was wishy-washy. It was a letter that was designed to get as many people as possible to say, we don't want war. We don't want, we don't want hatred. We don't want whatever. Well, that's apple pie and motherhood.
Right,
you got to stand up and say and send the message to young people in particular that this is a democracy and that we have to respect each other, and hate speech is not acceptable. And I think the governor was correct in addressing this in the budget. The budget is really the only place where the governor has influence over the legislature. Otherwise, the legislature can do what it wants. She could veto their bills, but she can't move things forward unless there's some kind of arrangement. And so the budget is where she puts her legislation forward. And she did further criminalize hate speech, and she brought attention to that. And I think that's the job of public officials, to go out there and say to people, that's not the way you're supposed to be acting. I understand what you're saying, and it's terrible of what's going on in Palestine. All these innocent people are being killed. But let's not forget why this started. This started because a group of crazy people went over and killed 1,200 innocent Israelis. And now they're hiding behind innocent civilians. So you've got to look at the whole picture.
Which is not
easy, and I think the president is trying very hard now to do that. So I support Joe Biden's efforts, and I do wish that more of the young people would look at this. There's some really interesting theories out there by psychologists and psychiatrists about how the pandemic created a pent-up energy, and students really want to have a cause, and the cause really should be hunger. The cause really should be trying to raise those in our community who have less. I was at a march yesterday in Irvington on hunger, and I'm very proud of one of the bills that I passed. I sponsored a bill, and it took a while to get it done, but to require supermarkets to give their excess food to food banks. Why? Because amidst plenty here in Westchester County, there is a lot of food insecurity. There's a lot of hunger.
It's a lot of housing insecurity, and
that's another issue.
Things that we're going to get into. But since I have this in order, we're going to have to switch around because
Okay, go ahead. Next.
You've done a lot of work in many different areas. So this is what I'm asking. Do you believe the Environmental Protection Agency is doing its job to protect the Hudson River from PCB contamination?
No, not at all. Not at all.
What would you do?
I think we have to take another look at what was going on way back when and look at that agreement way back with GE, I guess it was.
Right.
I haven't looked at where we are recently on this whole thing. But that's not you see, the job of a legislator in many cases is to push the environmental agencies to do what they're supposed to do. Look, you raise the issue of water, clean water, et cetera. Let me give you one example of something that I don't think we're dealing with and we should be, and that's drinkable water. Right now, we are the captive of a system that is barely working. Okay, New York City controls our drinking water, but without New York City, there's no control of drinking water. There's no state agency that's in charge of clean water. There is, if you go through Westchester, you'll see there are communities that are still on well water. You will see fire departments that take tankers to fires because there's not enough hydrants or not enough water in the hydrants. And I don't even live in a water district. I live just outside of Pleasantville. I don't even live in a water district. I'm paying Pleasantville a high price for their water, and so many people in Greenburgh are on a private company. So I believe that the state has to start to look at water. Look at what's going on out in the Midwest. Water has become as valuable as oil, okay? And we have to get ahead of it. And this is all because of climate change. This is one piece of the climate change impact that we really haven't looked at. I put in some legislation dealing with that, and nobody else picked it up after
I believe
left.
that's you co-sponsored an environmental bill of rights.
Yes.
Protect our right to clean air and water in the state constitution.
Yes, the voters approved that last November.
Yeah, in 2022.
Yes, I was a
think,
co-sponsor of that, and the voters approved that in 2022, I guess it was, right?
Yeah, 2022.
But that's one important step. Look, we've got to find ways to go forward.
All right,
okay.
I'm gonna have to push you because
Go ahead.
we gotta. Now, just quickly, fracking. That seems to be a big thing upstate, and they're fighting it. Just briefly, in a sentence or two, just tell our viewers again, what is fracking and why are they fighting it upstate?
That's an environmentally unsound way of extracting fossil fuels from the earth. They basically go in, dig down deep, and use a lot of water, pull out all kinds of chemicals, which end up somewhere on the property or in the area, and then they transport the either you can get gas out of that, you can get oil out of it, but the end result is a degradation of the environment. There are gases that are released. All kinds of problems. I have been a very strong opponent of it. I supported the legislation that we passed in Albany that basically banned it in New York State. And little by little, the legislature has been trying to ban the use of any of the products that come from fracking. There are all kinds of spin-offs. They were talking about using some of the salts, water that comes out on our roads. That would be a total disaster. We don't need that. So I think we voted, if I remember correctly, we voted to ban the use of those products in New York. And I think we got to keep doing that. Fracking is not a way we should be seeking fossil fuels.
Now, I believe, since we're talking about all the legislation, you've been a part of the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. I know it was first enacted in 2006. Could you bring us up to date on?
Sure. What happened was when George Pataki was the governor, the legislature passed this bill, which requires that there be what the name says, a reduction of the use of diesel fuel in the state, and it got adjourned. Every budget just delayed. Why this was in the budget, I don't know, but that's the way it was. Every governor basically said, can't comply with this, so let's delay it 2 years. Let's delay it 2 years. And when I got to Albany, I was familiar with this because I passed the same act in Westchester County to require that the county and any contractor doing business with the county use low sulfur fuel and use the best available technology on their emissions, on their vehicles. And so when I got there, I said, what are we doing? So every time this was delayed, I got up and spoke against it and pushed and pushed and pushed until finally we let it go into effect. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's now in effect. And it was something that the environmentalists were pushing for.
All right. So this is a thing where you're taking on the whole industry or individuals upstate.
What are you talking about? Which one?
The fracking.
Oh, fracking, you're talking about an industry. A lot of people were trying to talking about the fossil fuel industry. Okay?
Yeah.
But a lot of people were finding that after they cut a deal where the industry came in and said, let us buy the rights to what's underneath your property, they found that their property was destroyed afterwards. They found that their drinking water was despoiled, and that the air was not breathable. And so little by little, I think people are starting to understand that there's no free lunch, that they're coming in and giving you money you think you're getting for nothing, but in fact they're destroying your neighborhood, you're destroying the environment.
All right, now, one of the issues that still haunts Westchester County, because although we do have poor areas, the quality of life in many parts of the county is very expensive and high.
Yes.
And I know County Executive George Latimer, when he first got into office, I believe the Westchester Medical Center in Valhalla, I believe they're still planning that's going to open up. He renegotiated and got them to put aside some land so that workers that were not getting paid top salaries would have housing there and they could afford to live in Westchester. Is there any kind of creative thinking like that the state can do?
Well, the governor has been pushing to find different ways to provide housing, affordable housing.
Right.
Okay, let's step back for a second. Westchester is just not affordable.
Right.
Okay, I mean that's hard to say. Obviously, people are living here and getting by, but it's not what you would say is quote affordable.
And many younger people just
and senior citizens who want to stay.
And I'm even talking about late 20s, early 30s. They just can't afford.
They can't stay in their own community, and neither can seniors, and that's a problem. So how does government do something about this? Well, first of all, to push back on the costs, we've got to reduce property taxes, okay? So I looked for ways to find substitute monies. And we came up with one, I think it was Paul Feiner's idea in Greenburgh, and Drew Fixell, who was the mayor of Tarrytown. They said, why not allow us to put a room tax on all of the hotels we have in Greenburgh?
Yeah, I remember
okay?
that.
Now, wherever you travel around the country, you pay a huge room tax. All right, it's tacked on at the end. The room's going to cost you $150, and all of a sudden you're paying $190. Why? Because there's a room tax put on. Ours is not that high. The county had a small sales tax on it, but the local municipalities that were providing the services, somebody gets sick in the room, who comes? It's the local EMS, right? They're the ones who show up. If there's a fire at the hotel, it's the local fire department. If there's snow, it's the town that clears the roadways. So I had to do it 3 times. I passed legislation that allowed the town of Greenburgh and all of the villages and the town of Mount Pleasant and the villages in the town of Mount Pleasant to do what the cities do, and that is impose a small room tax, a fee. And let's face it, who's paying that? It's out-of-towners. Very few people from our communities go stay in a hotel, right, in Westchester. So it's basically out-of-towners.
And I've noticed that, White Plains is not the small little town that it was when I first grew up here and moved in, and they do quite a large volume.
Yes,
of
and Greenburgh
business.
has all those hotels, and the Finer estimates it's $1 million a year that people are not paying in property taxes. Okay, that's a lot of money. And the other thing is, now we look at the other end of the spectrum and we say, how do we help the seniors, the poorer seniors, stay in this community? I fought to change the law to increase the maximum income for citizens. I think it was $36,000 or something, and I think we've raised it to double. I think we doubled that in Greenburgh, and then lo and behold, it went statewide. So we have helped.
They just finished, or a couple of months ago, there's a senior citizen
complex in Greenburgh.
Complex, yeah, that they
that's public housing. That's over next to the Greenburgh Community Center.
But it's for retired.
Oh yes, it's for seniors. Yes, it is.
I mean, it's you don't want to throw people out into the street.
No, there was a lot of controversy over that. That was a town issue. I didn't get involved in that, except to cheer on additional housing. Look, I was counsel to the Housing Authority at one time, and I was on the town council, then the Housing Authority, then the county legislature, and I did different pieces of a program to move people out of public housing who were over income and let them buy inexpensive units in the neighborhood. We built the units and we let them buy those units. So look, housing is a problem at all levels. The governor came up with some proposals that I think were a terrible idea, to be honest with you, to allow the state to override local zoning. I'm hearing that Mary Jane Shimsky was one of the speakers in favor of that proposal until she found out that her community really didn't want that. Local governments want more housing, but they want to be able to figure out where to put it and how to put it into the community. Right. And I think the governor's got the right approach right now, and that is to reward local communities that allow for more development. And you need the subsidy. Land is very expensive. the land, labor, and loans. Those are the 3 L's that make up construction, and they're all very expensive. So you cannot do affordable housing unless you have some kind of a state subsidy. And I think the governor's going in the right direction now, where she's going to reward communities that do this, and she's going to provide monies to subsidize the housing.
All right, I know you've done work in this area, but I have to ask the formal question. Did you support, do you support a woman's right to choose?
Oh, yes, of course.
As
you know, I mean, I started working on behalf of freedom, reproductive freedom for women, back when I first started getting involved in politics in Westchester County. I was the attorney for the Westchester Coalition for Legal Abortion, which is the predecessor of the existing pro-choice organization, which is Choice Matters. I was on the original board. I was their attorney for 18 years, and I heard some terrible stories about what women went through before abortion was legal. And it was horrendous. We don't want to go back there, and I just wish that the United States Supreme Court would hear some of these stories, but they seem oblivious to this. So when I went to Albany, I was a very strong proponent of taking Roe versus Wade language and putting it in our statute. And I was one of the supporters and sponsors of the constitutional amendment that's going to be on our ballots this November. It's an equality. It's the Equality Amendment. It will make sure that the right of a woman to choose her own health care will be guaranteed in the New York State Constitution. It also, by the way, prohibits discrimination against various other classes, including on the basis of identity or disability. I had put a bill in separately to put in a constitutional amendment that would protect people with disabilities against discrimination. And that got folded into this big constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot. But look, the right of a woman to determine, look, the right of anybody to determine what their own health care is that's American. To take it away is un-American. I'll go back to that again. Women should not have to worry about what government's going to say about whether or not she's going to have another child. That should be between her and her doctor, and that's it.
All right. These Planned Parenthood clinics, at times in all different states, even New York, they've been attacked politically by both demonstrators on the left and the right. Should there be some kind of legislation to protect workers in these clinics?
Look, I was a volunteer many years ago when there was a women's health clinic in Dobbs Ferry. And I got to see how nasty the right-wing protesters were. And after that, I drafted legislation, which I tried to pass at the Board of Legislators, to further protect women's health centers from onslaught, by which you're now seeing happening, right? It would have protected doctors. It would have protected women who were going in and out, and the other staff. I never got it passed. It did pass after I left, but Rob Astorino vetoed it. And frankly, I don't understand why it took 10 years, but just right after Mary Jane Shimsky left the Board of Legislators, she took my place there, they passed it. Now, I don't understand why it took, I guess it was 12 years for it to pass. Again, but finally in Westchester, thank God, they have a common sense law that protects these places. Now, the state has a pretty good law. I was in the process. I had legislation to amend it to strengthen it. But again, in a legislature, you got to build consensus.
Yes.
We were doing a lot of stuff as it was. I mean, we passed the constitutional amendment. It's going to be on the ballot. We did put Roe versus Wade language into the New York State laws. So they never got down to my bill, but my bill I think was moving up and could have. I think we do need to strengthen the protections of those health clinics. I think it's terrible that people will actually go in and try to harass women who are trying to get health care. It's very interesting for those people who are unclear on this issue. I still remember the tears on a woman in Dobbs Ferry when she could not get to the health clinic because of all the protesters, she was explaining that she was trying to get pregnant and that she was having problems. And she was starting to bleed. And she wanted desperately to get in to see her doctor. So the protesters who claimed to be pro-life were actually keeping out a woman who was trying to get pregnant. So this is women's health care in general. And we shouldn't be interfering with that.
I think part of the problems with protesting, but which is another day for another conversation, is that many of these protesters that protest for causes, they don't do their homework studying the issue.
That's true. That is true.
Okay. Now, the recent budget that was passed by the governor, a lot of people were anxious because there was the debate going on whether the governor was going to cut out the foundation aid formula for Westchester schools, but I believe that she did keep it in, and it was a $2.6 billion increase in aid for this year. What's your view on that?
I think, look, when I was in the legislature, we were working very hard to reform the formula, but we also put in place a hold harmless. What the governor was doing this year was trying to eliminate the hold harmless, which means a lot of our suburban school districts would find that they would have to increase their taxes dramatically, but there's a tax cap.
Right.
And so they can't do that. So what happens to the schools? Do you fire teachers? What do? Do you close down the school part of the year? And so the governor's plan just didn't make any sense. And fortunately, the legislature was able to push back. Now, the $2.6 billion additions went to those needy schools that had dramatic changes, whether there was a huge increase in the number of students or whether they had a larger minority population or ESL, English as a second language population, which I think was actually pretty good. I don't have a lot of criticism of the budget on that issue. I do think, though, that we, going forward, have to make sure that there is at least a cost of living increase for every one of our school districts. Because the school districts have certain, it's the same kind of thing as I'm talking about with Edgemont before. You've got a certain fiscal structure, right? A physical structure. And you don't know from year to year. You can't start selling off buildings like some have done in the past, and then lo and behold, the student population skyrockets, and now you got to go out and buy a building or build a building. That doesn't make any sense. So you've got to maintain the structure. Teachers need to get a cost of living increase every year. So does the staff. And every year there's new technology that we need to bring in for our kids to make sure they stay up to speed. So each one of our school districts needs to get a cost of living increase from the state. Now, that doesn't mean that our schools, our suburban schools, need to get big jumps in there, but there are other things that our schools have to do, and we have to support them. For example, we should have pre-K for 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
Okay? And that was a big push that I was part of that. We were looking for 4-year-olds. And I think now, finally, I think we put in place when I was there a plan, a 3-year plan. And I believe that has now gone into effect. But now we got to start to look at 3-year-olds.
Well, as a former teacher, that's very good.
Right. The sooner you get the kid with a professional, the better they're going to do.
And some of them don't come from environments where the parents can stimulate thinking, or they're working 2 jobs and they can't sit down at young formative ages
but you're also talking about professionals. You need to get the kids with professionals who know how to assess the kid and then decide and say, this is what the kid needs. As you know, I'm a spokesperson and statewide spokesperson for people with disabilities. It's clear that the earlier you identify a disability, the better chance you have for that kid to overcome that disability. And that's why we have early intervention programs, et cetera. But there's so many kids that are not being diagnosed until they're 6, 7, 8 years old and maybe older. And if we have universal pre-K at a very early age with professionals who are trained to identify what the signs of a disability are, we can get these kids into programs much sooner and overcome their disabilities and live a normal life and be productive.
Right. I've got to push you. We really I've just got to stick this in. So try to keep it short, but it's very important. All right. Guns have been a big problem for numerous years, but I've also heard reports, and I can't verify the accuracy, but reports by the national media that one of the reasons why we have problems with the migration immigration is because a lot of these gun sellers, they are supplying gangs of third world countries, and they're terrorizing the population, and that's causing the population to come over in larger.
Look, we understand that the conditions in some of the South American countries are terrible, where there are gangs and where there is a lot of violence. In fact, if you look back to the Obama administration, President Obama was trying to set up a program to minimize that in some of the South American countries, and it just failed. It just didn't work. But it was an imaginative approach, and the money ended up going into the pockets of some of the political, thieves down there. And yeah, I think you're right. That's one of the reasons that they're coming here. But the gun issue.
You supported the New York SAFE Act, the red flag law, ban on children getting assault rifles. There was recently a court ruling that they held the parents of a child responsible because he killed some students in school. What's your view on that?
Well, look, I changed Westchester's gun laws as a county legislator before I got a chance to vote for the SAFE Act and all of the rest of these things. Number one, we discovered that people had gun licenses forever in Westchester County, right? And the county clerk at one point said, we've got somebody who's registered, he's 101 years old. Is he still alive? Do we know where that gun is? So I pressed, and we got the state legislature to change the law in Westchester County to require that gun permits be renewable, so that if the person doesn't come back in after 5 years to renew the license, the police are supposed to go out and find out where that gun is. Secondly, I passed a law, I think we're one of the few counties in the state that still have this law, and that is a safe storage act. If you do not have the gun on your person or in your control, now what does in your control mean? Well, you got to lock it up if it's not within your control. If you're the only person in the house and the gun is on the kitchen table, it's within your control. But if there's anybody else in the house and the gun is on the table and it's your gun, it's not within your control. You got to lock that gun up so somebody else doesn't take that gun and misuse it. And we have seen circumstances where people who have had break-ins, they had their guns locked away, and the thieves did not get the guns. While in other circumstances where the guns were in a drawer or in a closet somewhere, the thieves got the guns, and there's more guns on the street. So I did that before I got to the state legislature. In the state legislature, I was the first to pass a bill dealing with ghost guns. They seem to be a big issue right now, okay? But I passed a bill that would ban the manufacture, possession, or transfer of a gun that was made with a 3D printer.
Yeah,
and
can't the average, well, not the average citizen, but now they have it right that citizens can just create those things themselves.
Well, it's illegal now. It's illegal now, okay? So my bill was the first, and the legislature has since built on mine. I think they've amended it twice to ban ghost guns. But look, this is a problem. It gets into criminal justice reform. I was in favor of many of the reforms that came to us. For example, the bail reform, okay? I voted for that because I don't want to see innocent people sit in Rikers. But I was very concerned about some of the language because my feeling was if somebody gets picked up with a gun, even if they're not using it, I want to know why. Is that a person who's part of a gang, or is that a person who's afraid of a gang? And we got to get that information out because we've got to prevent violence. So that was one of the problems with the bail reform, and I don't think we've dealt with that yet, although I was pushing to close that loophole. But the gun issue is a major issue, and I did vote for all of that other stuff, and I think there's more to do.
I could talk to you easily another 2 to 3 hours, but we don't have the time.
There's just like one issue I'd like to raise with you, and that is I was very disappointed in this budget. People with disabilities, once again, were ignored. The state is failing people with disabilities. This budget, some people made a big deal over, well, we increased pay through Medicaid for workers. 1.7%. So if you're making $18 an hour, the increase is 30 cents. That's an increase. There are 25% of the jobs in the field of taking care of people with disabilities, taking care of seniors, are vacant because people are getting paid $18 an hour while Amazon is paying $25 an hour. Yeah. So, okay? And they did, the industry, quote the industry, said we need a $4,000 increase for people who are working in this field to bring them from $18 an hour or $17 an hour, or some getting paid the minimum wage, what is that, 16 something, okay? We got to bring them up to a competitive level. The legislature ignored them completely. So the people with disabilities, that's just one example of the problems, and that's one of the reasons I'm running again. Somebody got to be in Albany to understand this.
I got to cut you. Look into that camera. I can only give you 2 minutes. Tell the voters why they should send you back to the assembly.
I'm running again for the assembly because I'm somebody that you can trust to do what's needed for our communities. I was asked to run by people in Greenburgh who feel betrayed by the current assemblywoman over the Edgemont issue, but that's just one example of how the current assemblywoman is not meeting the needs of our communities. On the other hand, I was there. I was there fighting for choice. I was there pushing back on inflation. I was there as a pro-environment legislator. I was there as a gun sense candidate, and as we discussed. So I think I have an understanding of what our community needs. I was also pushed to run by people with disabilities because they're finding they just don't have somebody to push back on some of the offensive policies, frankly, that are coming out of OPWDD. They're blocking housing for people with disabilities. They're blocking. It's. I want to go back to Albany to represent the people of Greenburgh, Mount Pleasant, and Northwest Yonkers. If you take a look at what I've done, the monies I've gotten for our different communities, the playgrounds and the roads, etc., I directed those monies to the needs of each one of our communities because I understood our communities. And Mary Jane Shimsky clearly doesn't understand Greenburgh. She did not protect Greenburgh. She sponsored a bill which could be the destruction of Greenburgh in the future. And I want to go back, change that, and represent people with disabilities and represent the rest of our communities like they deserve to be represented. You can trust that I will do that. Thank you.
Tom Abinanti, thank you very much for coming on Profiles and Issues.
Good questions. Thank you.
And we want you back again.
Okay.
And again, we are indebted to all the public service that you have done for us. I want to remind our viewers that the Democratic primary is June 25th. It's important to vote. Your vote counts. You're not going to get quality in government unless you sit down, analyze your needs, and then voice it. If you leave other people to do it, then you can't complain. Okay? All of our programs can be seen at no charge on demand or on your computer or iPhone at any time on our website at www.thedennisrudenshow.com or www.profilesangissues.com. Please email your comments about the program to www.profile.issue@yahoo.com. All of our programs are broadcast on Optimum Cablevision and Verizon Fios. Check your cable calendar for time, day, and channel. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.